Hello and welcome to BQ Prime. You're joining us on this special broadcast where we're discussing India's prospects for a rating upgrade. And to discuss this topic further, we have Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who's a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Mr. Sanyal, welcome to this discussion. Let me start with the fact that last evening we saw Fitch Ratings downgrade the US credit rating from AAA to AA plus. That was down by a notch. In this scenario where the world's largest economy is facing a rating downgrade, is it time for the other large economies to start pitching for an upgrade of their own? India has been waiting in line for a while. I would certainly like to know your views about it.
Well, that's up to the rating agencies to consider, not me. But let me say that, this rating downgrade of the US, for example, do remember that this is not the first time they've been downgraded. So I think S&P had already had them a few years ago, had downgraded them. So that leaves basically Moody's as the only one that has them on AAA rating. And in some ways, I've been arguing for a while that there is a disjunction in the US's macro stability indicators, particularly since they have been trying to undo a fiscal problem by tightening monetary policy and causing stress to their financial system. So I've long held the view, and I've made this point before as well, that ultimately the solution to the US macro stability issue lies in not in tightening monetary policy, but in tightening fiscal policy. But anyway, that is their problem. Let me come to India. It has also been long my argument that India, given the fact that it is not only rapidly growing, but in every indicator you can see we do rather well. And yet we seem to be at the bottom rung of the investment grade. I think this is not warranted because we actually outperform virtually every other country except on one parameter. I think on fiscal, we are at par with most of the others, but in most other parameters that you need, whether it's foreign exchange reserves, external debt to GDP ratios, even on the fiscal, if you look at the debt to GDP ratio dynamics, because we are a high fiscal deficit country, we are also a high growth country, and the nominal growth to nominal GDP difference plays in our favor. So given all of this, I have long argued that we should be rated at least one, if not two, rungs above where we are. The things that pull us down, I think, are somewhat unfair. One of them being, of course, the use of per capita income as an indicator of our sovereign rating. Now, I have no idea why per capita income should be used when we don't use per capita debt. After all, our ability to repay is relating to our income vis-a-vis debt. So when we take debt to GDP, then we should also take overall GDP or growth in GDP, or maybe even the investment rate, because that's future production capability. But why current per capita income? Because after all, we are not taking into account per capita debt. Anything in India you divide it by the population, it comes out to a small number.
Correct.
So I have made this point lots of times before, and let me make it again, that if it was a fair assessment of India's ability to repay its debts abroad and its willingness to do so, we should be at least rated one or not, if not two notches up from where we are.
Fair enough. The Prime Minister recently pointed out, and I know that this is a point you've also made in the past, which is that within the next 5 or 6 years, you could see India becoming the third largest economy in the world. I'm curious to understand from you what are now sort of factors that are pushing this hypothesis in such a strong way.
Well, we are at about $3.8 trillion as an economy. Germany, which is the fourth largest economy, is at 4.3. But do remember, they are actually in recession, so they are actually shrinking
Right.
at a time when we are growing in not just growing in real terms, but in nominal terms even higher. So, in that situation, the fact that we will go past them in the next 18 months to 24 months is, from an arithmetic perspective, very, very doable. And then the next country in that queue is Japan, which is at about 4.9 trillion. Again, give a couple of years more from there. So by 2028, it's reasonable that we should become the world's third largest economy. In fact, from a PPP perspective, we already are the world's third largest economy. So this is in nominal USD terms.
Okay.
And I think that is more or less within grasp. Obviously, nothing is certain, but it's a very, very doable thing given the momentum in our economy, given the fact that most of the macro stability factors are in decent shape. So, I think it's a reasonable expectation that we will become the third largest economy circa 2028 or thereabouts.
Okay, fair enough. In the past, coming back to the India rating question, in the past when rating agencies have issued their statements, they've pointed out one issue that they always seem to have pointed out was the banking sector. Now that seems to have completely been taken care of. We have a significantly healthier banking system than what we had a decade ago. I wanted to understand from you, so the other part of that, usually their reasoning is fiscal consolidation, and that we need to do better. What is your response, or what do you think is necessary on the fiscal consolidation front, apart from whatever the government's already done?
Well, on the fiscal consolidation front, as I have always stated, we need to be very, very careful about going out and doing populist measures and spending.
Right.
This is particularly a problem in some of the states. And, I don't want to take this into a political debate, but the fact of the matter is, whether it's state, center, or any other level of government, I think it's fair enough that certain amount of support is given to the very poor. But other than that, we need to be very careful of doing populist things. For example, things like bringing back the old pension scheme, which is an unfunded liability, which ultimately the future generations will have to pay for. So, we need to be very, very careful about these kinds of things. Now, having said that, I would say that despite these issues, our debt to GDP dynamics is not as bad as would suggest that by just looking at the fiscal deficit, because we are a high growth country. And remember, it's not just about the 7% GDP growth rate in real terms. A nominal GDP growth rate is somewhere in the 11-12%. So, in some ways, this forgives many sins. As long as this is significantly higher than the nominal interest rate on our debt.
Right.
And also remember, the bulk of the debts we are running, public debt we are running up, is all internal rupee denominated debt as well. So all of this means that, the Indian economy's ability to repay its debts are actually reasonably good. And it certainly, I have argued before, once you take into account many of the other factors, like, for example, our foreign exchange reserves and the external debt to GDP ratio, our growth momentum, our demographics, all of this suggests that, we should be rated much higher than we are.
Okay. Coming to the other side of the story, which is the inflation, that issue, more or less the RBI seems to be in control. We have not yet, for a while now, we have not yet breached the 6% sort of upper band of the tolerance limit, the MPC's tolerance limit. I want to understand, there are the supply side measures that the government has taken with regard to let it be exports, exports of food grains, or any other of these supply side measures. I just want to get a sense from you, is that enough from the government side? What more can you do, or is there even a need to look at it?
So, right now there's a spike in vegetable prices. Now, obviously, tightening monetary policy has no real benefit for bringing down tomato prices. And these things happen every year. Something, onion or tomato or potato or something, spikes up. And I wrote about this in the economic survey of 2022. that this requires doing something about our agricultural policies, and and those are long-term reforms. We can't solve this by macroeconomic tightening in any way. But leaving aside this vegetable price spike problem, overall inflation seems to be reasonably well behaved.
Yeah.
There is no real, bubbling wage pressure in the system or bubbling pressure on commodity prices, although oil prices have again gone up again a little bit. But nevertheless, there is generally no core inflation pressure inside the country. And so that means that the RBI quite correctly stopped hiking 2 rounds ago. And I think they are on top of the game as far as macro stability is concerned.
Okay, fair enough. I want to start wrapping up this conversation with one question around exports. Now, that's an area where we've seen a bit of a slump for most part of 2023. Again, the government has taken measures. You've had the PLI scheme, but I want to know what is missing now. I mean, last year this was a problem which the government resolved with its own measures. What is holding back exports now? Is it just the global macroeconomic outlook?
Absolutely. I mean, the global trade has suddenly slumped very sharply because finally the monetary tightening measures that everybody was putting in place worldwide is finally beginning to bite. You already have countries in Europe that are in recession. So you can clearly see not just India, but every country, China or any of the other big exporting countries, all have their exports have slowed down. Now, in that context, it's not surprising that Indian exports have also slowed down. What can we do about this in the short run? Well, not very much. The PLI and other schemes are really for building out the long-term supply side. And similarly, building infrastructure and other things. Those are all long-term, medium-term things. In the very short term, you basically can do very little. Other than say that, look, we do have a domestic market that is growing reasonably well, which provides some sort of a cushion to manufacturers. And so they should take advantage of it. But I am not in favor of trying to counteract the slowdown in the export sector by trying to pump the domestic demand too much.
Right.
Because we do have growth right now in the 6.5% to 7% range, which I think is a good growth rate under these circumstances. And unnecessarily trying to push growth past 7% under these circumstances will just cause stress on our current account by pulling in imports. So under these circumstances, I think macroeconomic restraint is what is necessary. If for whatever reason this slump externally begins to slow down a lot, presumably under those circumstances, energy and other prices globally will also come off. So they may, under those circumstances, we'll see what we can do, maybe even provide some stimulus. But right now, it's too premature for that.
Okay, sir. One last question, and I promise I'll let you go after this. But with regard to the consolidation front, again, I'm coming back to that point. I know you've already discussed it in detail. But when you look at the latest numbers on the fiscal deficit side, you still see a slump on the corporate tax, that side of the story. And that's been the case again throughout most of the year. What do you think? What do you think that this is sort of showing? Because profitability is pretty good on the corporate side. The dip in the taxation, I just want to get a sense as to what you think is the reason.
See, you have to maintain momentum in the economy. We saw for several years massive increases in corporate and other direct taxes. So the fact that we are not growing on those high levels is not surprising. At some point in time, it will level off. And the one-time benefits you got from tax reforms, etc., came through. Now you have to maintain this GDP growth rate, and then that will feed through. So what I'm saying is, look, if the companies are remaining profitable, they are, and as you can see, they are beginning to now invest as well. The private sector investment rates are beginning to gather pace. Under those circumstances, you have to maintain stability and not rock the boat too much.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Sanyal, for joining us on this conversation.
Thank you.